1.
Let me set the scene. Every day, you're fortunate enough to walk to work. And as you walk, you pass by a little pond. It's scenic. But one day you notice a disturbance in the water. There's a young child flailing in the water. Now, the pond's only about chest deep for you, but to her, she's at risk of drowning. Would you jump in and save the drowning child? Of course, you might get your clothes wet and muddy. You'd have to go home and change. Then you would be late for work. Would you still do it? I imagine that most of you, if not all of you, would say, I certainly would jump into the water to save a drowning child. Well, this scenario has been created by a Princeton professor named Peter Singer. And like any good professor of moral philosophy, Singer accelerates or escalates the scenario to make it a little more difficult for you to respond. Would you still jump into the water even if there was only a 50% chance that you could save that child? Would you jump into the water knowing that her parents had entered the country in violation of immigration laws? Would you jump into the water if you had a very expensive leather briefcase filled with important documents that might get stolen if you tried to save the child? Again, most of us would certainly jump into the water and save the child. But then, Professor Singer comes to the crux of his argument. If we would jump into the water to save a drowning child, there are hundreds of thousands of children in places like Appalachia and Africa who are at risk of dying today. A few dollars from you would save their lives. It's been 20 years. 20 years since Jacob dreamed of a stairway to heaven. 20 years since he stole his brother's inheritance. And now he's headed for a reunion with that same brother. And he's scared. He can't sleep. So the night before, he heads into the hills where he has an encounter, a vision, a dream, that he wrestles with a being. Is it a man? Is it a god? Is it himself? Is it his brother? The two wrestle all night. And finally, as morning breaks, the stranger asks Jacob to let him go. Jacob says, only if you bless me. And the stranger gives him a blessing. And Jacob is given a new name, a new identity, a new purpose as he leads his people. Well, that story from Genesis chapter 32 reminds us that we all wrestle. We wrestle with our consciences, with our obligations to the world around us. We wrestle with ourselves. How should we live moral lives? What's the purpose of our faith? Why do we, who have so many resources at hand, seem to do so little when others who have so very little do so much for other people? I remember going to school with a young woman who became the pastor of a small Presbyterian church. She wanted to visit all the members, so she looked at the roll and, well, they said, this one family, don't bother with them. They don't come to church anymore. They stopped about 2 years ago. But she drove out to their house anyway. And the mother was there, the wife. Welcomed her into the house, and they sat down for a cup of coffee at the kitchen table. We talked about this, they talked about that, and finally, we talked about it. It had been several years before. The mother was vacuuming, and she hadn't seen her young son for a few moments, so she followed his trail of toys through the den, out the patio door, across the deck, to the pool, where she found it. At the funeral, she said, our friends were very kind. They told us it was the will of God. The pastor put down her coffee cup, and she thought to herself, should she touch it or should she leave it alone? She touched it. I'm sure your friends meant well, but I think they were mistaken. Why? said the woman. What do you mean? The pastor said, I mean, I don't think it's the will of God that children should die. Well, then who do you blame? Said the woman. I don't blame anyone. I only know that why these things happen. But the woman said, I guess you blame me. No, the pastor said, I don't blame you. I don't know why these things happen. I only know that when your heart broke, God's heart broke as well. Well, it was clear from the woman's demeanor that the conversation was over. The pastor left the house kicking herself. Why couldn't I have just left it alone? But a few days later, she got a phone call. I don't know where this is going, said the woman, but my husband and I would like to talk with you more. We always assumed that God was angry at us, but maybe it was the other way around. We wrestle in this world, and sometimes it leaves us exhausted. What is our obligation, our moral obligation to the world around us? Don't be afraid to question God. Don't be afraid to argue with the universe. Don't be afraid to stand up to the powers that be. Don't be afraid to confront the demons within. Because when the morning breaks and our wrestling is over, we might find ourselves with a new purpose, a new identity, a new meaning to our lives.